Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Evening Jones. I still have not grown accustomed to this world where I don't have something to point to when I say that. I swear I'm gonna get it figured out. I promise. Anyway, appreciate you checking your boy out. If I'm not mistaken, as we speak right now, there appears to be something called the Commander in Chief something. Anyway, I watched a little bit of it, and let me tell you, some of it was hilarious. And I don't mean that in no good way. I do not. I took a vacation last week, except I didn't really take a vacation. I really just didn't go to work. Long story there. But yeah, I would like to send a shout out to all the people who covered the NFL and covered the San Francisco 49ers. And I just want to know why it is that none of y'all couldn't notice that that dude hadn't stood up for the national anthem the week before. Because if y'all had done that the week before, I could have done the whole week of Kaepernick stuff, and then I could have had that week off from work. But that's not how it went. It didn't go that way at all. Everybody noticed right when the vacation got the crack. And that wasn't cool. And I ain't really trying to tell nobody how to do their job or anything like that. I just don't. I mean, nobody thought about me in this at all. Not a soul did, right? And see, here's the thing about being on vacation, and I think we all know this. When people need something and you're on vacation, the worst you can do is say no. So you have to understand that someone who does the kind of work that I do, there's no actual power here. Nobody's afraid to call me and ask me to do stuff. Right? There's not a single person in the operation who's just hey, other than maybe Shannon, right? Nobody else is thinking about me in the way and be like, you know what? I don't think we should disturb him on his time off. You must be crazy. And then, this becomes in large part an Ask a Negro endeavor. And so once that happens, now you got people who don't even work at the same place that I work that are now making these phone calls and asking me to do stuff. Right. And look, gang recognized gang. I can't be mad at them because ultimately the worst thing I can do is say no. But man, I sure wish people had not been trying to get me to say yes so much. So you do a favor for a partner or something like that. But I feel like if this had gone on 1 week before, if people had immediately noticed what was going on, I could have done all this on company time. Instead, we were doing it on my time. And I mean, what's really hood, right? What's really hood? Anyway, my time off from work wasn't so bad. That right there is probably the best way to put it. Wasn't so bad. There is an interesting note, though. And I do a radio show called The Right Time on ESPN Radio, 4 to 7 Eastern, or you can check it out in the ESPN app. People weren't necessarily so pleased with one of the people who sat in for me on my sports radio show. This is a very interesting thing to absorb from my perspective, though. And the reason is I did notice that there's a significant portion of the audience that rejected the fact that the gentleman sitting in was a fairly conservative fellow. And I guess you can make the argument that I am not. And so I think it was kind of jarring that the sheer coincidence is that this happened, the week the Kaepernick thing happened. But it was really wild from a distance because I think something that, so I have a certain approach to the way that I look at problems that some can make the argument is not necessarily that common in the sports media space. So I used to fill in for people, and people would be so jarred by the fact that I was the person in for whoever the guy was that I happened to be sitting in for, and I knew I had to dismiss a lot of that because some of it is just being absolutely jarred by the difference. But it is certainly interesting to consider the fact that anybody would ever put me in a position to do a radio show that would be established enough that there would be like a legitimate backlash for the idea that somebody who was sitting in was not like me. Like that's kind of a wild thing to really stop and do the math on, right? When you think about it, like that's some homie, we made it. Like that was wild. Like, and I wasn't even like really actively consuming the content. I'm just kind of watching as it goes. And so I used to know this dude who was real adamant about the fact that you don't want whoever is your replacement or your substitute to ever be like really good, because then they don't miss you. And this was wild because people missed me, but I don't think it had anything to do with like the actual quality of the radio while I was gone. They were just like, yo, when are you coming back? It was like people who I don't even think like me that much were kind of coming at it from this perspective. It's very different. It's very different and interesting to see that this could possibly happen. But also at the same time, I want to note the fact that like I dig the idea of, if I'm not on my show, I dig the idea of somebody who is wholly not like me coming in. Again, because I've been that person, right? So if it throws some people off, okay, it throws some people off. But I like really do dig the idea, notion of having someone that is far from being like me in when I'm there. Because like I don't need someone just to be like parroting or someone that I agree with. If you make compelling content, that's cool. And I also think that people who agree with me could stand to have their cages rattled every now and then by some ideas that they don't want to consider. Right now, I mean, sometimes you don't want to consider the ideas because they're stupid. And I think you certainly get the option of determining when those circumstances are at play. But, you know, you can never be so arrogant about your viewpoint to think that there's no value in someone who is completely on the other side for your audience. And there is a value for it, generally speaking. Anyway, let me see what your questions are. Well, that's a pretty interesting set of questions. Wow. I'm having a hard time deciding which one I want to go with. What's up with Malia Obama's snitching ass friends? You know, I think this is a great question. And here's why I think this is a great question. Okay. Because, see, I am a little bit confused. You guys may have seen it, but Malia Obama, didn't she already have a previous picture where she appeared to be indulging in the herbs? Then I saw a picture this weekend of her, and there was what I believe is called a bong in the picture. And I recall seeing that and just immediately thinking, you need some friends who have some relationship with consequence and fear. Like understanding that both that consequence and fear are a tandem pair, right? Like you have to kick it with people who have some fear of the notion of consequence. You do, because otherwise you just gonna wind up in like mad, reckless situations, right? Your friends have to be afraid of what might happen. And it feels in a lot of ways as though her friends don't appreciate the magnitude of like being Malia Obama. You understand what I'm saying? Like I don't think they get it. Like, yo, guys, my dad's the president, right? Y'all can't just be taking these pictures willy-nilly while I'm around. In fact, I mean, I know it would probably like be a drag on the party But I feel like if you Malia Obama, you got to have the no picture rule when you in the house. Y'all got too much to lose. Y'all don't have nearly enough. Nearly enough. Now, this is what I want to know. All right. And you guys let me know if you've been thinking the same thing, because I feel like this isn't an observation that only I could make. Her grandmama was living in the White House, right? So she didn't just grow up like with a mama that don't appear to be tolerating too much nonsense, but also a grandmama, like grandmama in the house. Yeah, and look, grandmama didn't come to be indulgent. Like this ain't like grandmama we only see her every couple of weeks. Grandma came to hold it down, right? That's like this is what grandma is here for, to hold it down. How did that conversation go? How does this go? Yo, you turned up on the internet with a bong. How's that go with Mrs. Robinson? That's her name, right? Mrs. Robinson. How does that go with Mrs. Robinson? This is before we even get to Michelle. How does this go over with Mrs. Robinson? Because I feel like Mrs. Robinson is probably the one that's the most irate about this. And I think that her mama is probably closer to her daddy's camp, which is kids do the darndest things. But even still, y'all kind of out here like this on us. Granted, the homie Barack is on the way out the door, right? And he's on the way out the door in perhaps the best of circumstances in terms of hoping to have some legacy of yours cemented. And that is having a complete circus of an election follow you, right? So in 2008, we're coming out of Bush. And I mean, look, it wasn't going to be a whole lot that was going to make it where Bush could turn the tide on anything at that point. But Bush was followed up by a dude who won in large part by just having an amazing campaign machine. Like, even if you weren't in agreement with things that Obama said, you had to kind of acknowledge the fact that they ran perhaps the smartest campaign that anybody has ever run, right? Like, it was amazing. It was textbook. I mean, they did an amazing job in running that campaign. There's no way around that. So at the very least, you're like, okay, this guy's got, something impressive going on. Obama's on the way out the door, and these folks that's trying to get it behind him, I mean, America just doesn't seem to be feeling it. Right? I think that's a fair and neutral way to put it, right? There's not a lot of enthusiasm on either side. Well, there's one side that has a great deal of enthusiasm. Probably it just happens to be balanced by the opposite side that is absolutely horrified. I think these are indisputable statements that we can make on this one. But yeah, like Obama's walking out of here like, yeah, y'all let you know how good y'all had it, did you? And I say this as a person who disagrees with him on a whole lot of stuff, right? He's like, say something to me now. Look what y'all about to get, right? Obama gonna be out here hooping and playing golf, just like what I tell you. Anyway, though, yeah, Malia got to be like, look, I got to chill out these pictures. We wound up securing this lead, like getting back to that. But y'all got to chill out these pictures, right? Like, and this is but in fairness to her, not even in fairness to her, this is just like a kind of thing that has to be observed, is that there's a generation that really has no recollection of a time prior to rampant sharing of all these moments. Think about this for a second. I remember my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college buying cameras each of those years and just taking a bunch of pictures. Like, it's about March or so. We just got cameras and we just started taking pictures all the time. And so you take the pictures, and then like over the years, you either put them in an album or you just stumble upon a box when you're moving or something like that. And then you just kind of come across all these random pictures. It'd be kind of cool because you'd be like looking back on them all, right? Like you never really looked at them when they were too contemporary. The value is just kind of like when you stumble upon them. But you just, you kind of take a bunch of pictures and then you go like look back and be like, oh man, you're like, man, I hope this picture never gets out or da whatever it is, right? But like you couldn't just walk around with a camera all the time. Now everybody just walks around with a camera. Like I understand that these are largely not novel observations, but like everybody walks around now with a camera, and there's a generation of people that has never just walked around without a camera and unlimited space, because we were absolutely constricted to the roll, and then you got to drop them off, and then you got to go pick them back up. Like it was all those, like it was a great process that came with taking pictures. And like you could go on a real picture roll, but unless your money was like real good for college, you couldn't just be spending all your money up at the pharmacy getting pictures out. So anyway, but like it's not just simply having access to the camera, it's that all you need is the camera. Like there are no real auxiliary steps, and there's a whole generation that does not remember any time before that. And so they just take a bunch of pictures. And now, like, you are the president's daughter, which is a wholly unique situation to be in. And you want to be out there sharing pictures like your friends do. You want to be, because that's the social ecosystem, right? You want to be doing these things. They be sharing the pictures like, this is what you want. But it really can't be that. And like, I don't think you want it to be that. Right? Or unless it's one of those situations where she's like, I don't care what they think about me. I mean, I really don't recommend that approach. Like I can tell you that right now. While you may not care what they think of you, you don't necessarily want to have to put up with it. Right? Like it just becomes a cost benefit analysis when you really stop and think about it. But that being said, yeah. I don't understand how they ain't no Secret Service man that don't run no sweep for any room. Like, them cameras, like Sonny Corleone with them phones, like throwing them down and throwing bills on the ground to compensate them for it. I mean, gotta do what you gotta do, man. Appreciate the question. Let me see what we got here. Wow, there's a lot of good questions here. Forgive me for taking so long to figure out which one I want to check. Oh, let's do this one. Has there been more or less misogyny in hip hop since the 90s? This is a fairly interesting question. And the thing that I would say is the misogyny, I think, in rap now over those other times is, I could make the argument that it's a lot more passive aggressive. So like, their leader these days is Drake. Okay. Drake is a passive aggressive misogynist. That's the best way that we can put it, because it's all this loving, and all this simping and all this other stuff, but he be treating him bad, right? And listen to the things that he says. I mean, it is passive aggressive simping. That's what it is. And so I have to acknowledge, as someone who came of age in 90s hip hop, some of that stuff we were listening to was absolutely absurd. Like there is a level of absurdity that I feel that 90s rap that became mainstream had that doesn't seem to be as present as it is now. Like the misogyny is still absolutely latent, and it has certainly not become any sort of like pro-woman space. Like I do think that you can make an argument that to a degree there is some hair splitting that is going on. But I can tell you, like I feel very confident saying that the rap of the 90s, like some of that stuff that when we came up with it, I think there was a general tendency to broadly defend like just any notion of rap because we could recognize that there was a double standard in what the expectation of positivity was from rap versus all these other forms of art that weren't being done by young black people. So we could see that. So there was kind of a reflexive tendency to always be on the side of the hip hop. And I remember like when C. Dolores Tucker was coming out and talking about the way that women were being depicted in rap. And I remember my dad at the time was saying, look, this is a woman who hears these things and she just doesn't believe that it's proper to talk about women in these ways in this space. And I remember I'm like 14, 15 years old, and I'm kind of shaking off these arguments. But I think for me, part of what happened also was I got older and I realized that, dudes really believe this stuff, which I didn't realize at the time. Like, we could go the it's only entertainment argument until you realize that like cats are really believing this stuff. And so like a lot of us, Tupac line, Dolores Tucker, you a motherfucker. Hey man, I think you can go back and look at some of the stuff that Dolores Tucker was saying and like come back with more adult eyes on some of those things and realize that she wasn't wrong. She wasn't wrong. And I mean, I can understand the tendency toward, defense of culture and defense of self. But there is really like some of the crazier things that you hear in the 90s. I don't really feel like I hear coming up in rap as much anymore. But it's still not a really positive space for women. I just feel like it's less songs about like beating women up and things like that. I mean, like literally beating women up, and it's not like there's one of those per rap album, right? I'm not trying to say that is representative of like the entire genre, but the stuff was there and the stuff was moving. Like my brother always made a point that I have co-opted over the years about NWA that I think is a very good one, which is that one reason the NWA thing worked is that NWA was really selling something that is always sold. And what they were selling was violence. Right? Like it's very violent music, and American culture and pop culture has always gravitated toward the violent, right? And so this is really well done stuff. We can't ignore that part. It's really well done stuff with very violent themes and themes that are perhaps at their most violent with women. Like, when is that ever not sold? And it just happened to be done by really talented people, like generationally talented people. But part of why it worked was that it was selling something that was ultimately tried and true. Now, of course, part of what got them in trouble is they did something with the violence that also brings up a good point that people have made for years, is the gangster rap thing didn't really truly get scary until like they started making songs about shooting white people. Like when it was just songs about black people shooting black people, that really wasn't that big a deal. But once you go to fuck the police, now you're talking about shooting white people. And all of a sudden, this isn't really funny anymore. Right? Like, okay. We heard you. All right. Yeah. We got to slow down on that. We got to slow down on that. Right? But they were ultimately selling violence. And violence is what moved. But anyway, I think it's different misogyny, but the general level of misogyny is pretty much like it's what it is. I would also like to raise a question, by the way, in this moment, just because I was thinking about it as I was riding in the car today on the way home. So I'm riding on the way home. I'm listening to Sirius. My man Combat Jack is on with the Prophets of Rage. By the way, shout out to my man Combat Jack. I got cool with Combat Jack when Combat Jack used to listen to me when the Morning Jones was on Sirius. And now it's like super cool that I'm riding home from work and now I'm listening to Combat Jack on Sirius. You know what I mean? So he's always been a real good dude. I've always done his show when I got a chance coming to New York, because he supported us when we were doing all. So I'm glad to see him get his thing going. But anyway, he was talking to the Prophets of Rage, Chuck D and Rage Against the Machine. And I was thinking about this, and I think I've talked about this on this podcast, or I feel like I've talked about it in some space before. But I am very surprised that we have not really had a true, like, from the hip hop space, and the hip hop space has become pretty broad over the course of the last 30 years. But from that space, am I the only person that's a bit surprised that we haven't seen what would be like the public enemy of this generation? Like, given what's going on in the world, and given how many people, and visible people, by the way, are operating in what I guess you could call a protest minded space. Where is the public enemy? Now, somebody says it's about Kendrick. No. See, let me specify something, because I understand what you're saying with Kendrick, but nah, that's not what I'm talking about. Like, Kendrick Lamar is really, 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 really dope. But do you realize what Public Enemy was? Like, there was a point where you could make an argument that, like, in 1988 or so, that Public Enemy was like more rock and roll than rock and roll. And what I mean by that is, like, PE was like edgy and cool and street, aside from simply just like being positive. Like, I think Kendrick Lamar is performing like a great artistic service at this point in his career. And there are a lot of people that really love his music, but I also think his music is to a degree a virtuoso pursuit. And I don't mean that as a judgment, but I mean that if it is in a way, a virtuoso pursuit, you're going to have like this certain level of diehards that are with it. And I think that everybody knows who Kendrick Lamar is, but like, this ain't really like the full on captivating, like this is the coolest shit that's out here. Like, I was listening to that because what they were doing, Props to Rage, so it's Chuck D, Rage Against the Machine. So, they play a Public Enemy track and then they play a Rage track, and like the kind of fury that comes from it, right? So like, it's not simply just talking about these issues, but this kind of high intensity fury that comes, that's kind of fueled by the social condition. I'm interested in the fact that there's not an act that has done that and like turned it into like really being like the hot shit, right? Like, not just something people listen to, but like the hot shit. And like my man Bucky says, Run the Jewels here. Yeah, I mean, I love Run the Jewels, but I'm not talking about, 40-year-old dudes. You know what I mean? I'm talking about from young people, right? Like, not from a grown-up's sensibilities. Like, I'm just very surprised that there really isn't a group, at least right now, that I feel like has occupied that space. Now, the other thing that's interesting about that is that part of Public Enemy doing this is they like brought an entirely different sound, man, right? Like, you listen to It Takes a Nation of Millions to hold us back. And I know there are younger people who perhaps are unfamiliar with It Takes a Nation of Millions to hold us back. But for people of a certain age, It Takes a Nation of Millions to hold us back is the default answer for the greatest rap album of all time. Like, not unlike Jim Brown is the default answer for the greatest running back of all time. Like, you just start there and you work the rest out later. Like, it's such an accepted notion, and for a lot of people, that there has been like no re-examination as to whether it actually is. But there is certainly an argument that for its time, no album has ever been farther ahead of everybody else than that one was. And it is an amazing album that manages to do like a bunch of different things at one time. It is like phenomenal. And it's really driven by a certain aggression, right? There's driven by a certain urgency and certain energy. And it almost like, it didn't build into like, I mean, movement would be to overstate things, but it sure felt like one at times when you hear people talk about Public Enemy. Right? Like, it really does feel like that at times when people talk about it. And there really isn't anything in that space right now. And maybe there can be, I don't know. But I don't feel like the mainstream of rap music has any reflection of what appears to be the sentiment on the public situation. And I'd be curious to see somebody do some real research on what exactly the cause of that is. Like how exactly it happened, because I think that we can hypothesize a few different things, but I'd be curious to see how it gets to that point in legitimate application. Also, I'm seeing some names that people are throwing out there, and like I say, it's people that I rock with, but I think it's kind of hard if you weren't anywhere near the time period to kind of understand what a ubiquitous force Public Enemy had become. And even a cat like Kendrick Lamar, I don't think is in that space. And that's no shade to him. That's just a statement on the magnitude of what Public Enemy was for about 3 or 4 years. Appreciate the question. Let's see what else we got here. Could a Drake Kanye album be better than Watch the Throne? No, no, no. Uh, it it could not. No. And I need you to understand, and I'm sure I've talked about this on this podcast before, but it's worth kind of revisiting. I do not love Watch the Throne. However, I think Watch the Throne is a fascinating project, right? Like what Watch the Throne aspires to be is kind of amazing, because I think at first blush, a lot of people thought the Watch the Throne was basically just a whole lot of money flashing. In the end, you come away from it and like Watch the Throne is quietly like the most pro black album to come out in years. In years, in years, in years. Like that album is, when you really stop and think about it and look at what the explorations of the themes are, it is a middle finger to notions of white supremacy at every turn, at every single turn. Like that's what it is. We are rich, we are black, we are going to flash how rich we are, and we are going to show you how we are not what you say. That's pretty much the whole record. We are exactly what you say and nothing of what you say at the same damn time. I don't like the sound on all of it, but it has like incredible moments. Like Murder to Excellence is amazing, right? Murder to Excellence is also in a long line of tracks on Kanye albums where if Kanye has no credit on the production, you may rest assured that that track is amazing, because how amazing does it have to be for Kanye to be like, I can't do anything to make this better? Examples being Devil in a New Dress. That is Bank and No All right. There we go. So yeah, like I say, this ain't no meeting of the minds that I feel like I want to be privy to. I think about this for a second. Just a thought. Let's say that Kanye and Drake were getting together to do effectively 808s part 2. Knowing how talented Drake is and knowing how 808s is basically, in a lot of ways, it's like you can make an argument that there's a direct line from 808s to most of his like music, right? But would Drake make that better or worse? And would you want to hear an 808s from Kanye at this point? I'm a big 808s fan. So I'm one of there's people like that's a pretty polarizing Kanye record, but I'm here for the 808s. But I also contend that part of me being here for the 808s is that the 808s came out when I was mad lonely. Right? I wasn't rocking with him on everything he was saying, but I could understand where it was that he was coming from at that time, right? I understood him at that point. Like that may be the last time I can say that I actually understood Kanye, but I understood the hell out of him when 808s came out. And I think that if you were in a place in your life where you understood Kanye when 808s came out, I don't even know if your opinion on the record matters, right? Because that's like, you're not the median person. Like not everybody was on Strug when it came out. So if you wasn't on Strug, there really wasn't going to be no record that you felt like listening to. But if you get on Strug, go put in that 808s. You'll understand a lot about it, right? And you'll also come to appreciate the auto-tune in that the auto-tune, I think, is less about masking Kanye's voice, though it is certainly in part about masking Kanye's voice, but it winds up being used to fascinating effect to kind of create a morose feeling all the way through the record, like a flatness, like a lack of emotion, as though someone is exhausted because they've been feeling too much. Anyway, no, I don't want to hear no damn Kanye Drake out. Appreciate that question. See what else you got here. Yeah, you could probably use a few more questions, guys. Sorry, I said these questions were so great and I may have been lying. Well, I'll do some inspiration stuff for y'all, something like that. What are some of the goals you still hope to achieve in your professional career? Nah, I ain't really wanting to be out here telling people to like do things like I've done them. In part because the story of me getting to where I am, however you want to like talk about that, is fairly particular to me, and I'm not sure how this would have been possible for another person without a few things being what they were. As I say, most notably, I could get money from my parents and not have to pay it back, which can like get you through some lean times. But I had this weirdo thing about me in that I don't really do the goals thing. Yeah, I'm not. I feel like I had only one job ever that I made a goal to try to get. And I got that job, and it wound up being a fairly miserable experience. And I was basically fired after 1 year. And there are a lot of factors that went into it being a miserable experience. But I think there was nothing wrong with setting that as a goal and trying to achieve it. And it wound up being a net positive in the end. But it did then put me into a situation where I just needed to be ready to take any old kind of work. So like there was no way for me to see after losing that job that I was going to wind up going into radio. And then when the radio thing ended locally, there was no way for me to see that I would be able to do like a satellite show while still, through a company in Canada from my house. There's no way for me to see that as possible. And then when that went away, there's no way for me to see it's possible that I would have like an operation to do videos and write columns and stuff like that. And, after that, I was in a position where I could foresee that the next job was going to be something on television. And that's what it wound up being. But my approach on that has really just been, I just try to get myself to a place that whatever happens, I am prepared to try it, right? Because this game flips fast. So when the game flips into something else, you got to be able to adjust to what the something else is. Like a lot of guys who wrote for newspapers, what really got them in trouble is all they knew how to do was write for a newspaper. And so when the newspaper started going away and they had to start going about things differently, that just wasn't something that they knew how to do. And they didn't need to, they had reason to believe that they did not need to be as adaptive as they proved to need to be, because the newspaper seemed like an institution that was never going to go anywhere. Well, then the newspaper starts going away and it's like, shit, how are we going to do this? Right? Like we've got to figure out, what the next level of the game is. So I understand from those guys' perspective how it was, tough to figure out where the game was going and tough to catch up. But I'm native of these times, right? Like I started writing online in the year 2000. Like as this started cracking, I've been in it, since then. If there's anything that I've learned is that you just got to be able to do about damn near anything, So you can try to gear this toward, I got this one place that I'm going to go to, but no, I don't really have any of those, right? Like some big stuff is probably going to come my way at some point. And when it does, I will hope like hell that I will be in a position where I am prepared to do it when it comes up. That's all I can do, right? Otherwise, also you do that kind of stuff and you miss out on like other bomb things that you could have been doing, because you get so locked into what it is. But right now, like the things that might be goals right now, like you never know how much of that stuff will ultimately turn out to be obsolete. So nah, man, I enjoy my job. So I do what I do. And if for whatever reason the time comes that I got to figure out how to do something else, I'm trying to learn as much at this job so I can learn how to figure out how to do something else, if that's what it comes to. And and that's all you can do with any of this stuff at this point, is you got to pick up as much game or whatever it is that you're doing, because it's possible the game that you win, like maybe what you learned in there is transferable to something else, but you might have to go be doing something else if you're trying to do some hustling. Flexibility is the most important thing as far as I'm concerned. Appreciate the question. Let's see what else we got here. Let me see. All right. Most disappointing or unfortunate group/band breakup. That is a very interesting question that I had never considered until right now. Because one thing about bands breaking up and groups breaking up or whatever, I mean, on a certain level, you got to acknowledge that a lot of the time it was probably right on time, right? Like they probably weren't going to get better from the point at which this happened. You understand what I mean? So like EPMD broke up after those 4 albums. It was about time, right? Like, I don't feel like, damn, the next EPMD album is just going to be so cold. And they got back together later and they put together, I think, a run of serviceable albums. But I don't think it was going to get better. Like somebody mentioned Led Zeppelin. I don't think that was going to get any better. I think that had been as good as it was going to be. You know, Outkast is a very interesting one to bring up, but I think if they were at a point where they could still make that work together, they would have been making it work together. It was about time to go. Like, look, man, they had about a 9-year run, like a real 9-year run. They put out a while in what, '05 or whatever it is. That's like an 11-year run. That's a strong run, right? Like the likelihood that what was going to come after was going to be as exhilarating as what came before, probably not that high. Like you listen to the Police. I think it was about time. I didn't like the direction the sound was going in. I know they sold more records, but I wasn't looking forward to that. Didn't really appreciate it. No sirree, Bob. You understand? That's just me. So I'm trying to think if there's one where it's just like, damn, y'all hit like just hit like people talk about the Fugees. I look at the Fugees almost like, yo, Lauryn Hill is really dope, but I don't know how much longer we can like keep this Pros thing up. You know, Wyclef isn't like actually like great here. I think it was about time. I think they sold high. I believe they sold high. Is anybody else they're thinking about? I actually, the answer to this for me actually might wind up being CeeLo with Goody Mob. Because I went back and listened to the One Monkey Don't Stop No Show album one time, and it's actually not that bad. And Shawty Wanna Be a Gangster is an all-time great Goody Mob song with maybe the best Big Gibb verse of all the Big Gibb verses, right? Like I think if you put CeeLo on that record, they got another good one in them. They just put out that party record that wasn't great, but wasn't nearly as bad as people said it was. And then CeeLo is just like, yo, I'm blowing this pop stand. But I think they had more good records in them. I absolutely do believe that. That being said, I would like really like another Outkast album. Like a full on both of y'all in the studio rapping Outkast album. I'm not getting my hopes up. Stop. All this rumor has it and Gucci said, stop it. We've been down this road before. Stop it. If we wake up one day and there is an Outkast album, then we can all listen to the Outkast album. But what we're not about to do is get my hopes up about this Outkast album for the Outkast album to never come. Because I understand that some of you don't understand how many times we've been jerked around on that there's an Outkast album coming. All right? We're done with that. We're not doing that anymore. Okay? This is the 21st century. If they gonna do it, I firmly believe there won't be an announcement. It's just going to drop one day. So there's no need for us to be sitting around here anticipating. We don't have to do that. We don't have to do that to ourselves. We don't have to do that to each other. Don't do that to me. Oh, it's too late. God, I hope there's an Outkast album. They get me every time. They get me every time. Appreciate the question. Okay, did you see the roast of Rob Lowe / Ant Culture? Okay, I watched a significant part of I think I watched the first hour of the Ant Culture roast. And this is my only question, because it actually was the Rob Lowe roast. It just turned into the Ant Culture roast. And by the way, who knew Jewel got down like that? Hey, I I just want to know, what did Ann Coulter think the jokes were going to be about? And I asked that because she didn't seem to find any of it at all funny. Like every time they panned to her, she looked really stunned that anyone would say these things about her. Like she seemed totally unprepared for, I mean, I would imagine all the things that you would expect the jokes about Ann Coulter to be. I didn't even see her get to the podium, right? Like maybe she was good. I don't know. I think I changed the channel before then. But I was a bit floored by just how hard. I mean, they were hitting her with body punches. And so on one level, I don't blame her for being a bit taken aback by the way that people were talking about her. Because man, they were merciless, men, women, children. Woo! They were hitting her hard and taking delight in it also. Like, one thing about those roasts is some of those jokes, they just got to tell about people because the people are up there, but they've got no personal investment in telling the jokes. People went up there with personal investments in telling the jokes about Ann Coulter. Like they were like, this is my chance. And they reared back and they just beat the hell out of her. Like speed bag, body bag, speed bag. Oh my goodness. It was, but I don't know what she thought was going to happen. Like, I have no idea what she thought the end result of that was going to be. None. Because those are the things, like, if you're going to go hard on something, you're going to go extra hard. And those are the things to go extra hard on her about, which is the things that she goes extra hard about. And she just, every time they put a camera on her, she just was like, I can't believe they said that. And I was just like, have you never watched one of these things before? Like, I feel like your people should have like done some scouting and watched the film. I think they should have done that. I do think that indeed. Let me see. How long have I been doing this? 53. Yeah, that's good enough. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here on the Evening Jones. Try to get this thing done once a week. I was on vacation last week, but I appreciate you stopping by. My man Lance Gilliam handles everything behind the scenes. Remember, if you can't watch the Evening Jones live, check out the podcast. Subscribe to the iTunes Store. Subscribe at Stitcher Radio. You can also find us at SoundCloud. We'll see y'all next week. Take it easy.